deep, unearthing, notions, and as well as discussing about African philanthropic capital, right? Its origins, the power dynamics, the decision making. But what excited me, with this particular session is how do we center youth leaders, activists, in terms of shaping and influencing governance when it comes to African philanthropy, as well as the capital that would ensure that development, holistic development takes place, and that the quality of life is ensured in African communities. Thank you to the African Youth Philanthropy Network as well as its partners in entrusting me, honestly, to moderate this space, to really to hold space and keep and guide the conversations today. I'm not alone. I am with my provocateur that will provoke us in depth, in terms of, challenging the some of the notions that we have held when it comes to African philanthropy capital. And I was engaging with, acquaintances, I think days before and even today, and we find that the our understanding is so broad, right? Some come from understanding the emergence of philanthropic capital in Africa, so the capital that has emerged from the global north to Africa, but others are looking at how, the African philanthropic capital, what were its initial vision, its notions, and is it really responding to, development and ensuring the quality of life, and really flattening the power imbalances that we would see. So I'm with my provocateur, Lawrence Muli. You'll be introducing yourself soon, but also discussants, as I've mentioned, prolific discussants, young leaders that are occupying very, significant positions in organizations that would be unpacking and unearthing, what we will be engaging on pertaining to decision making, pertaining to, funding priorities, but how do we center young leaders, when looking at philanthropy and governance. I would love to encourage, I don't know whether the platform is open, Tembi, whereby in as much as we are engaging, but we also connect with each other. So if the Q&A box is open to those that are in the virtual space. Just introduce yourself, the organization that you belong to, or if you are an independent, where you're based. Let's connect on LinkedIn. Also, from these conversations, we would love for the engagements to not only be, held within this space only, but for us to keep the debate, reflect even on your LinkedIn and, your various social platforms. So I've said quite a lot. Don't know whether I introduced myself correctly, but I've said quite a lot. But I would call in, and I would love to invite our provocateur, Lawrence Muli, right, of the European Union and African Union Lab. I'm challenging you, Lawrence, to, provoke us, challenge us, you know. We want
That bar is
to
so high. Yo.
please, provoke us. We want to move from this point of discomfort as young leaders, right? I think also just to share, uh, uh, um, we're always told there's this cliched proverb that says, unless the lion tells its story, right, we will always choose, and the narrative of the hunter will always lead. So provoke us, challenge us, reframe it once again. As I've mentioned, this session, or even this topic, or this inquiry is quite broad. So lead us, my good sir, but please introduce yourself. I didn't want to read out your bio. I wanted this space to be as participatory as possible. So introduce us with all the flares. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Yolisa. And I will call you Yolisa because if I call you Lawrence, I'll think I'm calling myself. So it's very interesting that you also call Lawrence. But anyway, greetings everyone from Eswatini. Very good to be here. We're part of the Africa Europe Parliamentary Forum, which is really, really good. A network that I think the Africa Youth Philanthropy Network should actually be part of, and we can discuss that, later. But Yolisa, you've set the bar so high in terms of expectation. I hope I can barely even meet it. But so I work for the European Union Youthlab. We give grants to youth innovators and entrepreneurs across 22 African countries. That's something else that we'll share later. And it's very interesting, and a very interesting life cycle for me, because I started my work applying for funds as a youth activist, and then now it's an opportunity to actually look and share and give grants to youth innovators. And there's brilliant work going on in Africa. I'll share with three things. Firstly, it's who sets the agenda when it comes to philanthropy in Africa. Secondly, power imbalances that are actually affecting systemic change. And then thirdly, also, what's government's role? Why is it that there's only 6 countries in Africa, for example, that have an enabling environment and an ecosystem for philanthropy in Africa? We all know, first of all, that Western NGOs, the Gates and all of them actually control a lot of the philanthropy in Africa. And there's interest that come with it. It's very interesting when you look at why it is health and education, for example, that are core areas that a lot of this philanthropy goes through. But it's very good to see, the Stripes, the Alikonda Gote, the Tony Elemelu, who are actually connecting philanthropy with Pan-African development. And as I end, I'll also just like us to challenge also the notion of African philanthropy. There's a lot of world inequalities that actually affect whether the philanthropy is actually having the impact and systemic change that it should have. To start off, we all know the external donors and the huge philanthropists actually have interests, as I mentioned before, health and education. But there's also a very interesting thing that is downplayed around, power and regime change. There's a lot of money that goes to support democracy and good governance, but where is it really, directed to? Who is actually benefiting from that? Why is it that some governments are actually over-welcoming, quote unquote, donor aid, for example? The Africa Forward Forum was happening in Kenya last week. And it's a very interesting take. Would love to also hear how people took that. While the Francophonies are not really pro-France, we are welcoming that. We're welcoming them in East Africa. What interests are there? Is it a recycle of donor aid that is actually targeted towards interests that are there? African philanthropists, coming back to them, have done very well in actually centering a lot of the philanthropy to education, for example, and health, which is actually where the Western donors have been focusing for decades long. And that is very good. But then we need to then understand, yes, you can balance profit and Pan-African development, but then how conducive do governments actually enable African philanthropies to actually prosper. The other thing is when it comes to power imbalances, for example, African philanthropy is actually dwarfed by external aid. It's a reality. And there's three questions that I want to ask us, and we brainstorm around this. Firstly is, if Africa philanthropy is actually based on neoliberal crises, and that's how it prospers, does their philanthropy really decolonize aid and actually bring structural change around philanthropy and how it is actually administered across Africa? Where is also the intergenerational dialogue around this? Where are the young people who are not just benefiting, but part of the big philanthropies and the big billionaires in Africa that are doing this? Secondly, if favorable philanthropy only exists in, for example, 6 countries, and I could be wrong in terms of the numbers, but then statistics are showing that 6 countries are the ones that have an enabling ecosystem for this. What is then the government's role? Do governments actually have interest and actually ensure that donors are coming? Is there deals that are done behind the scenes in the name of bringing impact in education and health sectors, for example? And thirdly, diaspora remittances are good. They are actually statistically more than actually the formal outflows in a lot of African economies. But why are policies still favoring donors over cross-border African relations and enabling environment for actually African philanthropies to actually prosper? So the big question here is, where is the goodwill? Where is the transparency in funding allocation? Where are the tax incentives for African philanthropists? What is government's role in Africa when donors, as we've seen historically, are actually coming to have an agenda with their philanthropy? And then where's the place for the young people? Where do the young people actually fit into this ecosystem? Are we just, again, and I've been in the youth space for over a decade, with working with intergovernmental organizations from the AU to the EU to the Commonwealth and so on. And it's what hurts me the most is that at a policy level, it is still the same story. We are talking about the same youth empowerment we were talking about 15 years ago. And getting deeper into the youth space and why we need like agency and empowerment is that this year, for example, is going to be the 20th anniversary of the Africa Youth Charter. It's taken us 20 years to revise a legal framework that determines and enshrines the rights and responsibilities for young people in the continent. It is, I don't know if it's systemic or institutional challenges that exist, but we need to also reflect on ourselves as young philanthropists and this network that we have. Where are we influencing the policy? Where are we speaking truth to power? What networks are we building? In this forum, for example, that we are in, it was all parliamentarians speaking about amazing policies in their countries. We had to force young people to actually come and have an intergenerational dialogue with them, where the young parliamentarians who are meant to be here, working with the big parliamentarians as they have their discussions, with the young parliamentarians network that is meant to be influencing this. The systemic change that we need to see across all sectors calls on each and every one of us to, first of all, do our best where we are, but then ensure that we do not run away from governance and policy making and politics, because decisions will be made. And the reason why a lot of times young people are not engaged and not involved is not because they don't know. It's because everyone is up and about trying to do everything. If we all take agency and do what we can do in entrepreneurship, in education, in health, what we do then is we instill, and especially the ones I keep challenging the African Union. I worked there for 4 years, and it's interesting when going back just a few days ago. There's a lot of institutional challenges that still existed 20 years ago. there's no mainstreaming of youth in the institution that actually makes decisions for young people. They're doing very well. I mean, in terms of like the 1 million initiative, there's a lot of ambition. But then it's been 20 years, and now is when we're revising the charter. Now is when we are engaging donors to come on board in terms of like making sure that the partnership and the funding that comes is actually controlled by the African Union, not a consultant being hired to work for the African Union and the policies that they make. So I'm talking a lot, but back to the institutions, back to individual responsibility, back to institutional collaboration. I think that is going to be the way to go. I hope I have provoked us. The bar is too high. Yolisa, back to you.
You have definitely inspired some thought and some reflections. And I think what I'm taking from your provocations is the question, and it keeps clicking, in my mind in terms of, when we look at the agency of young people. You said that this year is the 20th anniversary of the Youth Charter, right? And I mean, there is a lack of mainstreaming of young people, right? And now, I beg the thought in terms of, are young people incapable, right? I know before you cancel me, are young people incapable of moving, right, the needle, of moving these conversations to really influence policy, or are they incapacitated intentionally, right, in not moving, in being kept mum, right? And this is quite institutional, right? And it speaks to the system and its inability to change, the systemic or structural change, right, by not centering and not having, the relevant powerful voices at the table. I know I speak a lot. Thank you for that.
We're on the same boat. And if I can jump on just that one thing you mentioned about incapable or incapacitated intentionally. Very, very sorry. I just got a call. Sorry. I think it's not in any way it's part of both things that you've actually mentioned. Firstly, incapacitated intentionally, it's a bit, you're the one provoking now, everyone, because sadly institutions come back to who leads the institutions, the individuals behind the institutions. So if the individual is passionate and is has a heart to actually move systems will move. The AU was so bureaucratic that then I moved to the Commonwealth, so bureaucratic. Now the EU, so bureaucratic. So systems will always remain, and systems will always preserve the policies and the structures and so on. So in terms of the system, it's coming back to, again, everyone playing their part. So we need that person in that system who actually can fight to change, structures that then limit, participation. In terms of like incapacitated, I mean, I think there's a lot of training, capacity building, and so on. But sadly, I mean, I think there's 5 development principles on youth development. There's mainstreaming youth in development planning. There's professionalization of youth work. There is measuring the youth impact through the Global Youth Development Index. There is how do you finance youth development? And sadly, you will actually be shocked that in Africa right now, going back to the systemic change and policy work that needs to really, really change, there's 3 countries in Africa that have mainstreaming youth in national development plans. For example, there's a very few 4 to 5 countries that have an actual professionalized youth association. SADC is actually doing very well with that. Most of them are actually here. There's no country that actually has had a national youth development index in Africa. So how do you measure how you empower young people if you don't even have, only countries in Europe, Australia, and so on have some of these systemic things in place? So we need to challenge our governments. We need to challenge the AU. We need to make sure that we are moving conversations to systemic change, because systems will always remain, and governments and intergovernmental organizations will always preserve what they do. So sorry for jumping in again. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, for just, stepping in and just expanding as well. I was asked to ask questions. I was asked to just guide and lead. Sorry if I was asking any questions that would provoke uncertainties or a certain discomfort. But I would love to also bring in our discussants, right? And in this on this virtual space, and I think we have 3 discussants joining us today, and there will is it 2, but we do have discussants that are just going to dive deep and unearth these questions that we are holding and you're pondering on when it comes to African philanthropic capital, right? Its origins, right? Whose interest does it serve? But I also want to bring in the second question, which is about decision making, right? Who actually decides where the money goes, right? There is capital, either from the global north, right, or capital that is emanating from within, as Lawrence has mentioned, especially from your high net worth individuals, or your philanthropists, from your corporate philanthropy within communities, right? But where is it? Who decides where the money goes? Are the processes transparent in that manner? I would ask, let me not ask, feel free between my 2 beautiful discussants, feel free, come through and share with us.
Greetings, everyone. Probably if I may say something on capital origin and strings. Capital often arrives, for example, in Zimbabwe in a prepackaged agenda, mostly from the international agencies. The strings are not always financial. Sometimes the strings are ideological. Like a funder may prioritize, let's say, for example, coding for kids in a rural school from Matabeleland, south of Zimbabwe. An area where they do not even have electricity, let's say, for example. So some of their priorities are misaligned. Like sometimes they focus on what sells the most. For example, a donor might choose to probably buy exercise book for learners because they will capture beautiful pictures and so forth for social media. Whereas what they are dealing with, it's actually symptoms. They're not actually looking at the root of what's causing whatever which they want to solve. So you see, there is a lot when it comes to strings, especially when you're looking into donors and funding. Like when you talk of funding, that does not account to local infrastructure gaps, you might not say, like, it restricts the innovation. It actually strengthens it. So yeah, I think that's what I've got to say in terms of the origin and the strings that exist as far as philanthropy is concerned, especially looking at Zimbabwe, where I'm based.
Great. Maybe let me just jump in right there. I think I'll start with a bit of a background because a lot of what I will say today is kind of anchored with this background. So I'm a daughter of the Kenyan soil, and I'm a Pan-African feminist leader alongside other leaders within the African Youth Panel. And I often tell people that as a feminist, I think I'm finally starting to accept that my place is in the kitchen, but not in the kitchen of domesticity, but the kitchen of sovereignty, where we are taking back whatever belongs to us and repatriating that. So in this kitchen that we are currently restructuring, there is a recipe for African development. For too long, our young people have been serving a foreign stew that has been cooked in a different place. We don't own the pots, we don't own the ingredients, we didn't choose that. We're simply following a recipe that might not necessarily nourish us. At the AYP, we are thinking about igniting and sparking our own fire and sparking this naturally. So to be fair, the AYP is funded by the foundation. And I think a lot of the relationship between the foundation and ourselves, we think of it as that of a supportive neighbor, because I think a lot of African giving comes from that which we get from our own assets. Whether it could be a bag of salt, whatever it looks like. In this context, it could mean different things. So the foundation is providing something, maybe a bag of salt, but we are the ones tasting the soup. We are the ones adjusting what needs to be adjusted. We decide who gets to sit at this table. And I think of them as, the investors of this sovereignty within the African context. And I often say that the house that we're building might be a house that they do not own the keys to, but we will be able to leave a light out for them and a cup of tea when they're ready to visit. But just to go back into the aspect of African giving, in the global sector, we are taught that philanthropy, as Fundile said, is something that arrives in a fancy suitcase, in a fancy framing. It comes from a plane, it has a logo on it. All the impact is sitting somewhere in a foreign Western bank account, and we need a 40-page manual to open all these different aspects. But in Africa, the giving isn't this suitcase. It is breath. It is something that we do naturally. It's a constant form of what we do every single day. We don't call it philanthropy. When we contribute to a neighbor's medical bill or a cousin's school fees, we call it giving. We call it living. We call it whatever we choose to call it. The suitcase is heavy, and this philanthropy suitcase is heavy, and usually, I'm just using different metaphors. We usually get it stuck at customs with all these different regulations and regulatory frameworks that need to be opened up before we can actually access what we can. For me, I think I approach my leadership through the lens of a lot of different feminists. Currently, I don't know if you've heard of Mina Salami, but she does have a concept of sensuous knowledge, meaning that the giving that we have is really anchored by what we already know. So the power that we as African feminists have is the power of relationality, the understanding that the resources are only as valuable as the social fabric they strengthen. I'm also grounded by a lot of other different feminists. I'm going to just mention a few of them just to show us the kind of context that we are already sitting on. There's Aminata Traore. She famously warned us that Africa will be suffocated because we are ignoring our own dignity. She argued that we need to have our own project. We need to be able to step out of simply performing in a theater our scripts have been written by others, and we need to be able to step away from that stage to build our own theater. We also have Nana Asmau, who created the Yantaru Network. She proved that intellectual philanthropy, and this is in the 1700s, is our most resilient asset. She did not wait for a grant. She did not build the infrastructure of liberation herself. She built it with the community around her. Similar to Wangari Maathai, as a daughter of Nairobi, I carry her legacy everywhere that I go. And she proved that when we mobilize the neighbors, the women who fought for our environment, these women are the ones who supported the healing of our landscape. So I usually ask myself, if all these women can lead such movements without a single technical experts from the Western side or the global North. Why do we act as if we are starting from zero today? Is there something that we are missing? Is there something that we need to start building off of that we already own, or just relearn about? So, I mean, I think just from what you've mentioned, it's really leading a funded project is really like walking on a tightrope. I believe the AYP would be quite stronger and more resilient as a purely community-funded initiative, and that is our ultimate goal. But currently, we are working with what we have. Currently, we are forced to measure our successes using KPIs that have been pulled out of a West African encyclopedia. As Lawrence already mentioned, how do we measure impact to young people? These metrics prioritize boundaries, they prioritize what has been spent. But what about what is within our hearts? What about what is within our own communities? How are we going to measure that using this kind of different metrics? So I think the measure of, the aspect of measuring impact through money should not be something that is driving the real impact that the real impact that lives within our African hearts. This impact lives within the trust that we have as neighbors, the agency of a young girl in a rural village, the young people being able to curate and start up their own initiatives within their village with their neighbors. It should be measured by that level of trust and by that level of anchoring within our communities. So for me, funding is a repatriated form of state capital, and I'll speak about this more a bit later. But we are using the resources to build the local infrastructure, the village savings and loans, associations, the asset-based community development processes. Those are the aspects of grounding that we already have as feminists, as Africans. So we do not, we need to make a choice eventually. We can use or choose to work with external aid, but we do not need to make it a necessity. It needs to be an option for us at some point. So I think if we continue grounding ourselves with what we already know and believe a bit more in that, we can start forming that backbone. Thank you.
We need to clock it for our discussions. Please share some hearts there, thumbs up, yes, claps. And I think, Nekesa, you said that you'll speak about this particular point later on, but I want to bring it back, right, with the following questions. I'm going to ask just 3 questions before we open up the floor. And I think, and thank you to Fundile also, by outlining to us, the current context and that is actually observed in Zimbabwe, right? And Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, in terms of the misalignment of priorities when it comes to the relations between the donor as well as the community. For lack of a better articulation, let me say recipient, but I don't love to say recipient, or the grantee, right? Whereby the community has, has identified, certain challenges within the community, but because the donor comes with advised funding, right, or with advised aid, there's a misalignment in terms of, the vision as well as the mission. There's no intersection, right? There's no connection in terms of, health and how health affects education, and how education affects wholly social welfare, right? And I loved also how Nekesa embodies, right, the principles, the values and ideologies of African philanthropists, and also positioning women, right, who have done it before. Philanthropy in Africa is not new. We might not have called it philanthropy, right? There are different, in linguistics, there's a different language to how we define and position philanthropy. And thank you for that, Nekesa, for really positioning the women and how they have shown us, self-determination. Right, it is possible. We know it is possible, right? But because sometimes the trust because we are in collaboration, there's, you know, some misalignment. And I think this question, which I want to ask and I want to highlight and bringing you in, Nekesa, is about power dynamics, right? So, you know, when we look at development, when we look at creating, you know, sustainable empowerment, we want to work together, right? Especially with, you know, international NGOs. I mean, currently, especially within the last 8 years, if I'm not mistaken, there is been discourse and dialogues pertaining to the shift, right? The shift of power, right? And how these INGOs come in and ensure that Africa leads, you know, African individuals lead the development, right? So we're going to look at those power dynamics and who actually is, you know, at the table. We know that the donors, international donors, or even, you know, African philanthropists are in, you know, at the table. There's the government. There's also the community, right? As the, you know, who should then be shaping the funding priorities. But from your observation and in your work, right, where are the risks, right? Where are the challenges that you have observed from your practice, you know, from your lived experiences, and where do you think we should start working as young people? Where are the opportunities whereby we make sure we truly move the needle and ensuring that, you know, the important voices are heard?
Thank you, Yolisa, for that. I feel like when you were talking, you were provoking me with some of the words. You mentioned empowerment, you mentioned shifting of power. I think if you look at, first, let's start with the language. How whatever we feed to ourselves, the information that we feed to ourselves already takes us where we need to go. So when you look at the word empowerment, for example, all this women empowerment, youth empowerment, these different phrases that came up, empowerment means giving someone power. Why would you want to give someone power when they already have it? It should be more of strengthening. So I do not usually, you know, go about youth empowerment lightly. I would prefer we say that we strengthen what we already have. So the next question you asked, when it came to the sustainability, the challenges, I believe the challenges is because Lawrence had mentioned something about the systems and the way systems already try to retain those policies that they already have. And I think you mentioned something similar as well. The biggest challenge is us trying to fit into a system that isn't really designed for us. So the minute we start looking at funding as something external, as something that someone across the ocean is coming to bring for us, at like a 1%, let me say, the 1% of the philanthropic world, which is a grant from a donor across the seas, I think that's a bit of where the problems start coming in. So at Trust Africa and within the African Youth Panel, I think we've done a lot of work when it comes to just looking at these different narratives. And one of the biggest researches that we did, the young people themselves went into their communities asking their peers about these different aspects of access to finance, for example, which ties right into the philanthropic aspect. We actually came to realize that the reality is very different. For example, Kenyans do give monthly. Kenyans, about 80% of Kenyans give individually. They do not give to a big, organization somewhere that is formalized. They give to each other. Any emergencies, someone would go and give to someone else. If it's, let me say, for lack of a word, the way you give money to one of your neighbors who would then return it with interest, that's still giving. The other thing that we've also gotten to see is that the young people themselves within these different demographics, where the papers don't necessarily favor them, they are not university graduates, they do not have the credibility that the banks would need for them to get loans. They actually go back into their communities and look into the what we call chamas. So that's the Village Saving Local Loans Association, where they borrow from each other and they have this sort of credibility amongst each other because they're neighbors. They are going to be able to hold each other accountable. So 98%, which is quite a huge percentage of the young people within these communities, actually depend on VSLAs more than they do depend on grants or other big, funding cycles. So the other thing that we started looking at was, okay, if they do get the money, if they're given the money, does that money come back into those BSLAs? And one of the most shocking thing is that the repayment rate was almost close to 100, because this is already proof of power to a neighbor, sorry. Someone you trust is someone you're going to be able to give. So I do not think that for us, one of the biggest challenges is looking for someone to come in and save us. I think we already have a lot of infrastructure to be able to start that within ourselves, and we can use what comes in as what's the word? Just as an addition to what we already have. The way we start grounding these narratives and the direction we take from the very beginning already shapes where we are going. So I think that's one of the different perspectives I'd give in terms of challenges and what we need to also look at.
Listening to you has me changing the view in which I was viewing philanthropy. Like every time we hear philanthropy, we always think of big organization with huge chunks of money. So whenever you think of decision making, you think of power, you always look at the one with the fat pocket, or one with the highest rank as far as politics is concerned. So this whole discussion here has me pausing and reflecting to see what really transpires as far as my community and society where I come from is concerned. Yeah, but generally there is a need for young people also to understand generally where the power lies. I think in everything that we do, it's very important that we as young people understand where the power lies, because if we understand where the power lies, then the decisions that we make as far as anything and everything is concerned will be informed, and it will favor us. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Fundile and Nekesa, for those thoughts, honestly, and how we actually bring in community giving and position it. And before I ask the third and last question, I want to bring in Lawrence Muli, right? In as much as you are a provocateur, but you're part of our discussions, right? Any thoughts around, the questions that we have engaged on, where you would want to expand with us? Pertaining to decision making, the power dynamics. There are 3 stakeholders, or 4 sometimes, including business, but there's this misalignment. Where's the challenge, right? And how can we improve it?
I mean, for me, I think the challenge comes back, and I've worked in intergovernmental organizations so much, and as much as I try to do the best in these systems, the reality is we need those intergovernmental organizations and we need government. And now the question is, how do we change and influence government policies, right? So we can. Kenya has led the way in going to the streets to speak truth to power, and I think, of course, goes across the continent. But then, what then happens around the young people in power? Because I engage with them on a daily, right? They have a huge role. I think they're also really, they are, sadly, because of ageism and gerontocracy, they get into that space and then they realize, oh shit, all this passion I had to come and change the system cannot change, right? But then we still need them. Do we need to train them more? Do we need to push them harder? Do we need to make sure that there is an incentive? Do they need to get that they don't get in and then they get caught up in the system of corruption? And it's a very sad state, to be honest, because it's you can see it's very, when I meet the European and African ones, not that any is better, but there's a culture around that I've seen around Europe, and especially the UK, where you actually want to do so much change that becomes your like it lends credence to your personality and who you are. In Africa, I think a lot of people who get into power, there's many, don't get me wrong, but there's many that then get caught up and get comfortable, right? So they no longer have that pride in changing systems, in changing structures, in changing policies. So it becomes the same old cycle. So I think there's a huge gap that is, these young people in positions of power, challenge them more, get that one thing that needs to push them to do better. Because once they do better, what then happens, and when that culture changes, is we get young people who are in positions of power who actually change policies for the sake of young people. So it's no longer a ceremonial. I mean, when I speak to some of the politicians, when I come back home in Kenya and across Africa, I almost feel like I'm in another world, because when you engage and you're asking, so you're a young parliamentarian, in how many position papers did you introduce? What is it on, and so on? There's just so much laissez-faire kind of attitude in young people in power. And I think for me, if we're going to change policies that favor an enabling ecosystem for young people, we need those people in power to change. How we do it, I don't know, but I think yes, it's something that is really critical to the change we want to see.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, for that, and just encouraging us in terms of I think you are actually probing us to the next and final question in terms of how do we collaborate, how do we center and see youth influence, right, when it comes to policy and governance. But before I ask that question, and it's the last one, and I'm bringing the room in now, right, I'm bringing I don't want to say external discussants, but I want to bring in the most important voices that are making this room possible, and I just will be able to fire it up, right? Let me first read the Q&A box. I see there's Abazit there. Hello. Oh, hello to our friends in Cairo. And Abir is saying there, is making a comment in terms of, this particular discussion has led Abir to rethink, the intersectionality between faith-based philanthropy, or endowment, and neoliberal capital circulation and system. Quite important, hey? Especially when we look at faith-based philanthropy. I must say I need to also read more on faith-based philanthropy. Quite embarrassing for me not to, having limited knowledge when it comes to faith-based philanthropy. But I would like to invite you, Abir, to the fore, to unmute and share with us. Welcome. Why am I saying welcome? Thank you for joining us to the most important participants or discussants that I will now ask to come through and share with us, their their reflections, their questions, or even comments when it comes to, how we understand, African philanthropic capital, the power dynamics, right? Where does the money flow? Who makes the decisions? But in asking the last question, which I'm encouraging also, our discussants as well as our provocateur to shed light on is, how can then young professionals, right, who are currently working, not only within the three arms of government, so the legislature, the executive or the implementation, and the judiciary, right, in shaping, philanthropic frameworks and policy. But how do then these young leaders, these young, activists influence governance policies, the ones that are currently existing and the ones, that are to emerge and to be developed? How do these young leaders influence these governance models to ensure that philanthropy truly serves African communities and ensure the well-being of Africa? That is the question. And the floor is open. Discussants can respond. But I also welcome our very important participants to come through, introduce themselves, and dive deep in. Lawrence, do you want to go first?
I'm happy. I'm happy to come in again. I mean, I think I love this conversation. Is there someone who was coming in? Sorry. I think this is a very interesting conversation, and I love what Africa Youth Philanthropy Network is doing, because firstly, we are having very provocative discussions. This topic, for example, when I saw it, I was like, these are the conversations that need to be had. What I am thinking, and on a long term, is who are the partners that we need. We all, there's a clear message, from Fundile, from Nekesa, around the direction of what we need to do. So who are the enablers that we need? If we can do a mapping around, okay, if we need the EU as much as it's a donor organization, how do we get in? If we need the AU, what do we do? If we need the actual existing philanthropists, how do we reach out to them? If we need governments in some of the flourishing, countries that have good philanthropy, how do we get to them? Who do we need in these networks? If we need government, who do we need to talk to? How do we engage? So it's almost looking, having the vision of where we want to go, which we already have. The network is doing very well with that. And then working back around, what can we do? And then what are the low-hanging fruits? Can we get someone here in all of these sectors that can actually be an enabler? And then how do we connect them? You're already doing this very well. I remember when I was speaking with Tembi earlier around the planning of all of this, I was telling her, okay, then you need to invite this one, that one, because in my head, I'm like, we need the people who are already making the decisions in spaces like this. And I'm so happy how well structured the whole conversations are and long term, that's really good. So for the next one, then we need to come back and say, okay, so how do we get the next people that we need to have here, and how do we add value to what they are doing? So you're already doing very well and you're inviting them to their space. They'll also want to learn what networks are going to also benefit the work that they're doing. So I think that collaboration, going back to just collaboration and partnership, yeah. Sorry, I think there are.
Thank you so much for that, Lawrence. Really, calling us to strengthen the ecosystem, and also to amplify the practice as well, when it comes to philanthropy. Lerato Moamohwa, please come through. We eagerly await.
Thank you so much, Yolisa. Video. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Yolisa, and thank you to Mr. Lawrence, both Ms. Fundile and Nekesa for their presentations, and I think quite insightful. And one of the things that we were I was excited to then hear about when I did register to come and listen in. However, I just wanted to share, unfortunately, I missed the first series, but I just wanted to share that just to add on to what they've already presented, and it's to say that I think, given our history specifically as Africans, is that the work of philanthropy initially started off was centered around political work or our political interest, right? And I think to a greater extent, whether it's faith-based, whether it couldn't matter what space we are in, that hasn't shifted specifically for the person who then gives us that money. However, the people who become, I think you said grantees, we have moved away from centering our own political interests. I think Mr. Lawrence spoke into it and gave it a work and said that Pan-African development, we don't even relate our work specifically to that. It's merely on us us knowing what the challenges are, but not understanding or giving context to the work that we're doing and what and how it then benefits the communities that we're doing this work for. But then again, I think it's also quite important that we start working to decentralizing philanthropy work. It should not belong to specific groups and or to the people then leading it or those who unfortunately hold the face of specific work that's being done across the continent. I think when you speak to the decentralization of this particular work, it then becomes community-based, where everyone becomes a participant in the change that then we are trying to achieve, educate on, and also they understand their own empowerment and also want to contribute to it. And then on the issue of when you put it together with who then funds, is that ideally, even if our reasons are not the same, we are also then able to defend that given the capacity from the different skills or the amount of group that people would then be contributing in our organization and projects that we do. So rethinking the capitalistic nature in which philanthropy works across the continent would help us holistically. And then I think I've spoken to the idea that philanthropy work is not
We seem to have lost Lerato there, coming with thought-provoking notions about philanthropy. How do we decentralize it, not hog it, and also just pinning or pinpointing just the context, the historical context of philanthropy when it comes to the continent or Africa. Hoping to hear from you again, Lerato. Let me also not hog the space and speak alone. I see. Let me start with Abir, Abazid, our cadre there from Cairo, and then we'll go to SADC.
Thank you so much. Thank you for insightful and all the speakers make me to rethinking literally what is happening and reflecting on what type of philanthropy we have here in Cairo or in between practice as an Islamic country or countries where Islam is the dominating is. So I'm thinking first of all, it is how we can direct the philanthropy money. Should I do it for urgent when we have a crisis, after floods or after earthquake, if it is natural one or other economic crisis, or we should to do it for a long run? The philosophy of philanthropy, it is supposed to be for long run. It is to solve the base. But how can I get faith-based philanthropy money? Because according to Sharia, it is already identified. So, and this is part of the debate that's happening at community level also. Okay, I put my money, but I need my money. It is going for the poorest people. I don't need to go to build a school. So I am as a giver. Thank you for Nekesa when she mentioned there are different names of giving. It is not only philanthropy. So some of people who are givers, they asking, no, I don't need to build a school. I don't need to build a clinic because this is my money and I give it to this institution, which is under philanthropy. So you have to work to allocate as I prefer. So this is part of debate. It's happening at community level, especially if they motivated by their Sharia or motivated by the priority or how they interpret Quran first. The second issue I'm thinking about, it is reflecting on how post-colonial state institutionalized philanthropy and endowment, because we have those examples and the big examples. I think the majority of African countries see from the Gulf countries. Gulf countries, they have their own system about to keep the endowment and the philanthropy is working. But comparing to the Egyptian style, which is the post-colonial state, normalized it, and yeah, it is a long history, like Loreto just mentioned. But I mean, it's how it is affecting, like the Lawrence question is, if one of this royal family coming from the Gulf and providing schools or whatever developing projects in one of African countries, to what extent you defined, I will accept it or not? At what, is it substituting my ex-colonial power type? Is it because it is faith-based one? So it doesn't mean it doesn't have any intention or political intentions. So I would like to add all of these questions, like Lawrence added, it's which partner we are looking for. And the last point, it is related to governance, as Lawrence mentioned, is, which is what I observe here in many of philanthropic good or active institution, they take the manual from international organization, how they governing themselves. So again, we are in, this is what I mean, we are still in the circulation of the capitalism. So, and also because they are looking for partnership, nowadays we have this, the bank of food bank, and they have all of this ads and TV, and they are proud that they have a partnership with FAO. They have partnership with other companies for food and grains. So for me, it is, what is the capital model you are working for? It is, again, you take my money as a giver and you put it in a partnership intention, but you still make this capitalist system is running, which is different from the philosophy of faith-based. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a very rich discussion. Shukran.
Please, Abir, please, let's clock it. Let's heart it there, because you also made me think, and I want to honestly encourage you, if possible, to even write, about these thoughts. I said that my knowledge is quite limited when it comes to faith-based philanthropy, but I actually, I'm reminded by the Sharia, right? But and how you expand in terms of the engagement that is happening within communities in terms of my giving. I want it to be more charitable, right? I don't see the long-term sustainability, and I don't want to condone it, because this is how I interpret, the Quran. Please, let's write about this. You see, I'm babbling again. Isa CP?
Sorry, I don't know what's happening with my video. So sorry, I'm not gonna able to put it, sending me to work on settings and all of that, which might take time. My name is Isam Dinge. Thank you very much to everyone who has contributed on this topic, which I think it's very important, and it's something that is very close to my heart, to working with communities and finding long-term solutions. And I think partly some of the challenges I've seen, having been engaged in community work over time, is this dynamic of doing the work because it really matters to you, but also how the funders are viewing the work in terms of what they see as an outcome. So, for example, if I want to focus on one community to make sure that I do the work over time and it becomes a community practice, is that seen as a good outcome as compared to do it in 10 communities? So quality versus quantity, I think, is always a challenge where I need to show that my work is spearheaded in different communities by holding different meetings across different communities. But is it making a long-term impact? I'll make an example. If you're looking at issues like there's a conversation, which is one close to my heart, how do we teach young boys to be better? But holding one or two conversations every other 6 months would not necessarily change their socialization, because remember, they are encountering these teachings every day. So it means even our countering have to be that robust. Similarly to I'm from the Eastern Cape, there's the epidemic of teenage pregnancy. You can't have a workshop once or twice in 6 months. It means it should at least be a weekly basis. But then that means that kind of organization would have to focus on one community over a span of a year or 2 months. Just as I'm closing, this reminds me of an author, I just forgot his name, Melusi Chabalala, I think, who wrote a book, Becoming a Man. His research spent over 12 years as he was writing the book, and engaging the same young boys and transitioning from being boys to men. And that then brings an impact, even if it's 10 boys. That's a lot, that's a large number as compared to doing a workshop in communities and saying on numbers, I've done workshop in 10 communities, but how many of those are really impacted by that work? So I really think we should look into, firstly, the sustainability, but also the impact over, and we should look at the quality over the quantity. Is it really changing lives? Is it really empowering? Because if you are doing 10 boys, they're able to share with their friends because it becomes their lifestyle, and everyone else becomes interested. Why are these boys different? Parents use these boys as a reference. So it means now the impact is being replicated. But if it's going to be a workshop, then it moves on to the next community, then it becomes for me a challenge. But then people then are challenged by what I highlighted at the beginning, the funder issue, and what they quantify as a good outcome or as an impact outcome. Numbers matters and most of those times, but real impact take time, and it comes from small groupings and then it replicates over time. So I think as young people, that's a challenge we really need to think critically on. How do we entangle ourselves or unentangle ourselves from this dynamic of funders and their influence, and what was the ideology we had? Someone explained, spoke on ideology. What was our ideology in the beginning when we wanted to do this? I wanted to see teenage pregnancy being capped in my community. So that means focusing on one school instead of 10 school could actually save a lot of those lives, and those teachings could replicate to the community. Thank you very much.
Reminds me of a Kiswahili saying, pole pole, slowly but surely. Tembekile Masego. I called you as if I'm calling a student.
I feel like I'm being reprimanded in a class. Oh my word. Those contributions have me so riled up. I think I always say, I say to the moderators and to everybody joining the series that I would not be saying anything at all. I'm going to be a fly on the wall. And as AYP, we're going to be taking everything and it feeds into a policy brief. So everything that all of you are saying is going to feed into a much bigger policy brief and a body of advocacy work that will continue from here on. But to why I raised my hand, because I know you're trying to wrap up now, you're going to be sleepy, you're going to start wrapping up. We've heard that Nekesa has said we are restructuring the kitchen. That is African philanthropy. We are changing pots, we're breaking down the wall, we're adding new cabinets, we are changing what the stove looks like. Fundile talked about how typical philanthropy is coming with its own prepackaged agendas. You know, Abir has talked about the faith-based philanthropy and how when we need to pay attention to that, and it comes with so many other strings attached on its own, and we're really living it as its own in its own vacuum. And I have a question and a challenge and something I want to hear from everybody. Really, it's not directed at anyone. What would this kitchen look like? What should this kitchen look like to you as a young person, one either giving or one benefiting from African philanthropy? What do you envision this new kitchen of African philanthropy looking like? This suitcase, I think Nekesa also mentioned it, gave a metaphor of a suitcase. What should it look like? What should it have? Because I think as we are building towards, I know this is a conversation we're going to have in the very last episode, but I want to start hearing from everybody what it should look like. What should its landscape look like? Who should be involved in it? Lawrence spoke about the institutions and the systems. What should those look like? So I just want everybody to put their innovative and thinking hat on and really just help me get a vision of what this could look like. That's it. I'm done.
Quite an important question there. Is the moderator allowed to also respond? Nekesa, please come through. You muted. You muted, my love. You muted. Just unmute. Yeah. Or is it me? Am I the problem?
No, I think Nekesa is still muted. Okay. Yeah.
You still muted, Nekesa? And I think we've lost Nekesa there. Hi, Nekesa. I think you're still muted.
I can blub before Nekesa comes in. I think the kitchen, Tembi, you just have this thing of asking this, pushing us to now innovate and give takeaways. I mean, for me, I think we need to have like this the high glass ceiling where perfection that we'll never achieve, but then for me, it's systemic change. If the kitchen has everyone playing their role, right? So if I'm salt, I'm not doing too much salt. If I am, I think Nekesa give a better explanation. If I am the pili pili or the veggies and what have you, and that goes back to owning our own responsibility and being very vocal about it. I mean, working and engaging with Tembi from the time she told me about this, in my head I started thinking, okay, what role do I have? So internalizing, all of us have our roles, and all of us have our access, our spaces. Imagine all of us then coming together in this. It could be getting the right person in the next conversation. It could be influencing a policy that is there. It could be giving a grant to the right person. It could be, you're pushing the agenda of, girls and education, as Nekesa was mentioning, for example. See, if this ecosystem works, it could be that parliamentarian. We should get a government person here to come and talk about, what government role should play in philanthropy, for example. We should get the philanthropists to also come, and we have those networks, right? They should come and also just share their experience, I think that's my 2 cents around the kitchen. Yeah.
Thank you, Lawrence. And I think we have them here, hey? We have a young parliamentarians in this room.
Very good, very good.
Yes, African grant makers, they're here. Nekesa. So everyone is in the room, and by collaborating, we need to know, what role am I playing, and not being all over the place. Nekesa again. Oh, what is happening? I wonder what's wrong.
I think she's
Yeah,
using AirPods, so she needs to disconnect your AirPods.
She needs to disconnect her AirPods.
So you
I
can't
think-
hear me now?
Yeah,
Can you?
hear you
Okay,
now.
I've tried it. I had such a strong point. Anyway, thank you so much, Lawrence, Yolisa, and Tembi, for really provoking that thought for all of us. I think it's a really important point for us to think. As you mentioned, I think all of us, or most of us, are in the room already. So my contribution was mostly towards Lawrence's question. He had asked, who do we need? And I think he sort of answered the question already. So what I was going to say is that we definitely need each other in all our different diversities, in all our strengths, in all whatever we bring to the table, this table of ours, we need each other. And the way I was thinking about it in terms of the tools that can help us really go forward with some of these plans is on the radical accountability, but not the one that is on a hierarchical, the higher ups. It's the one that is mostly within the peers. And I'll give an example for the Nikokadi campaign, since you're going into the election year next year as Kenyans. I think for us, even given the different, protests and the different statements we've been making so far, one thing that I've started learning about the young people within Kenya is that we've stopped looking for permission from someone above us, and we've started looking across to one another, asking each other the hard questions. So for like the Nikokadi movement, it's really, like the embarrassment you feel when someone familiar to you comes and asks you questions tomorrow about what you said you'd do. That's the same thing that the Nikokadi movement is doing right now. The young people are asking each other, why have you not registered to vote? What change have you seen that is making you feel so comfortable at home that you don't want to start by voting? And I know that some people would say that, okay, the system's democracy, even if we vote, it will still be rigged. That's fine. That's one step. The other step is now for us to continue that revolution. And I know that I've been watching a bit of Winnie Mandela's story, and there's a point where she said that revolution never came in a peaceful way. And I'm not saying let's cause chaos, but I'm saying that we cannot use those peaceful mechanisms to try and change the system within the system itself. One aspect that I think has started really coming up a lot with the young people, especially in the philanthropy space and other spaces that we are in, is that this aspect of training, and not to really water down what Lawrence said earlier, the aspect of training incentives, these peaceful approaches to keep us within this harmony that has already been built around us, I don't think that is necessarily always the best way to go. Yes, when you look at training in a way that it can actually support each one of us to be able to hold each one of us accountable, that's great. But when you look at training from a perspective that teaches us things that we presume that we do not know, or we presume that we need a better or more refined system above us to teach us that, I think that is, we need to really look at that again. And this goes to a lot of different structures, our education systems, our healthcare systems. And I think a lot of that is already being questioned right now. So I'll just start by saying we do need each other, and we are the collective that begins, and then others will follow after that. Yeah, thank you.
We are the collective that begins, and others will follow. Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Nekesa there. Dropping the mic for us. Colleagues, we only have 10 minutes left of this wonderful session. But before I bring it in, let us go to the chat box. And I think this question, when I read it, it was, it's relevant to our parliamentarians there, especially with Lawrence Muli and his work. And it's quite sad that you won't be able to share much of your work, but we'll be following you on LinkedIn. The question there is from Rogers Omolo from the AYPN Kenya, our friend there. And the first question is, how can philanthropic institutions shift power and decision-making directly to grassroots organizations and communities instead of only funding large intermediaries? I think that's where, sorry, I almost said I think that's where Nekesa comes in. And the second question is, what practical steps are being taken to ensure African grassroots organizations have access to flexible long-term funding and not just short-term project grants? Our discussants, do you want to start? But this question, it's open also to our very important participants. Fundile, I see your hand is up. Your virtual hand.
Yeah, so I raised my hand before the question was read. So basically what I wanted to say was we need to shift the narrative. We need to change from wanting to be beneficiaries all the time and be the architects. Sometimes we need to do away with wanting to fit into a certain table that is already in existence and try to build a table that cannot function without you. We need to be innovative. We need to come up with tools. These days we have got AI, we have got technology. So as young people, we need to come up with tools. And most importantly, our leaders are humans with errors. You'll find out that some issues that we as young people will be seeing as issues, they don't really know or they don't really see them as issues. So it's up to us to alarm them that this is an issue that is affecting us as young people. And most importantly, there is a need to a certain extent to understand the language of politicians. For example, I'll give you an example of a context in Zimbabwe. There was a time where there was issues within the local hospital. The blankets and whatnot were no longer in a proper state and so forth. And usually we as young people, we've got a tendency whereby there is an issue with the hospital. Instead of addressing the issue within a hospital, we now attack politicians. We now attack governments. So at the end of the day, they become defensive instead of solving the issue at hand. So whereas we can actually come up with solutions to that problem at hand, pitch to these government ministries, see if they cannot take up our issues. If they cannot take up our issues, then we'll then find an alternative solution. So personally, the way in which I define radical is not all about banning things and whatnot. It's all about taking charge. If they are not listening, try to come up with ways in which you can make them listen to you. Like when it comes to philanthropy, we always cry that when they see big organizations, they're not saying me, blah, 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 blah. Whereas we need to put ourselves out there, be in a position to learn. What is it that this organization is doing that I'm not doing? What can I do to better myself? Because we might say ABCD, but there is what we call reality check. So we might run away from the truth because we want the situation to favor us in a certain way. So there is a need for us to learn, document, impact, speak the language of evidence, do away with outsourcing information. There is information that already exists within our society. Some of the information is not actually true, but we have made it our reality. So we are now living that reality of that information that is outsourced, which is not actually what is happening within the society. So there is a lot that we need to do, especially as young people.
Thank you so much, Fundile. And I think just highlighting how we need to speak the language of evidence. That for me was a mic dropper. Lawrence Muli, your last takes, your epiphany.
Very good conversation. Very good conversation here. And I think it's also these conversations that help us also, like I've learned so much. It's also challenging me around how I think as I engage with the EU, for example, in my head, as long as those grassroots organizations get our grant, for me, I'm like, but now I'm thinking through also beyond that, how are we systemically empowering them? How are we like now we're in our second year of grants, for example. Last year, grantees, we brought them together for a week at the end of the year to see what they're doing. But now we are already, again, rushing on the second year. There's 2 more years. So it's how do we change those systems of grants? This question around, practical, steps are being taken to ensure African grassroots have access to flexible, long-term. This goes back to what I was mentioning earlier around if we all in our spaces, right? If your work is speaking truth to power, do it in a way that is thinking long-term. Like what eats me up is this organizations, and I'll share with all of you some of the grants that we've given to this organization. All of them are actually, not all, 75% actually rural organized, marginalized groups, young people living with disabilities, young people working in education for girls and empowerment and so on. And there's so many of them. We'll be publishing them soon. And I think what I am thinking now is what's the future of that program? Now going back again to what are we all doing in our spaces, and conversations like this then challenge each of us, because then there's an aspect like Nekesa was mentioning around this whole, funders from, abroad coming, and it's been the traditional approach. It's something that, helps me rethink how do I, make sure that I'm actually meaningful and impactful in this role that has a donor that is coming from the West, for example, and I think as we were talking about the kitchen, we all need to make sure that firstly, we support each other, we share about what we are doing. I'll give you a practical example and sorry for taking so much time. This Southern African Youth Forum, and thanks to Tembi and the others, were at this African Parliament. They are the only young people in that forum, and they were brilliant. And it's small things around making sure the systems are engaging the right young people, engaging the right youth organizations, engaging the right partners, and we empower that ecosystem. If we do that in all our sectors, I think we're building a very powerful network. Yeah.
Thank you so much to our provocateur, Lawrence Muli of the EU-EU Lab, to Nekesa of Trust Africa, as well as Fundile, who is a SADC Youth Parliamentarian. Please, guys, let's clock it. The hearts there, the claps, please, the thumbs up. We would want to also engage with you further. I don't know how much time I have, Tembekile. Surely I have 3 minutes. But how I want to consolidate everything. I'm reminded of one of the songs we used to sing in pre-primary, grade R, which says, "Be bright in your corner, but let's march together to Nirvana." Right. And I guess that is what, that is my take and how I'm consolidating everything in these last few minutes. Thank you to our very important participants who joined in this session, who were able to, share their thoughts, either on the question and answer box, or unmuting and share their thoughts and critically reflect with us pertaining to the discussions on African philanthropy capital, right? And I think what is most important, and I think it must be a takeaway for us, let's write about it in terms of how young people influence, right? How do we influence, not only the existing governance models, but how do we develop newer ones that ensure, yes, we shine bright in our corners, yes, we're perfect, but also how do we move together, how do we collaborate, how do we ensure that there's that intergovernmental or interrelations, right, within our work. Let us not work in silos. Let us not focus on working in silos. Let's mobilize these local resources. Let's mobilize our national resources, our regional resources, to ensure that Africa is not developed, but Africa is seen with all its important flares. And there's quality. There's quality in terms of social welfare, and there is much more quality economic growth in Africa. Thank you to everyone. Please, I mentioned that this is a space not only for engagement, but for us to network. If you sing an individual that you would want to connect with on this platform, please connect with them. Go through the participants list and connect with them. Don't forget, next week Thursday we have another session, right? I think next is it the 20th, next week's session. I might have and the next week session, it would be led by Rion van der Merwe. I saw Rion there from Impacting Youth, whereby they look at the community paradox. Who does philanthropy serve, right? Looking at accountability in communities. What are the barriers that prevent where the barriers that prevent resources in reaching communities, and if power truly shifted in communities, what would philanthropy need to change or give up? And that is it from me. Thank you. Asante sana. Thanking you in my language of hearts. I know I've been speaking a lot of Kiswahili, but my brothers and sisters need to, you guys need to tell me, teach me your language, please. Teach me your languages. And from me and the AYPN team, as well as our partners, thank you so much to the participants. Thank you so much to the provocateurs. Please, 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 please. I'm giving you virtual hugs here. Thank you so much. See you again next week. Asante sana.
Cheers, everyone. Asante sana. Good day.